Hi, it's Richard in the Old Loki Workshop. Today I'm actually going to make something instead of just showing stuff off. And I'm going to make little wooden boxes like these. My plan is to make this drawer look more like this drawer. This is one of the shallow drawers I did a video on. So I'm going to build wooden boxes. So the next thing to do is figure out what the dimensions of the boxes need to be. The drawer is 18 1/8 front to back, and then it's 17 1/2 wide. I already know that I want the boxes to be 2 1/2 inches high, so I got that set. Now the thing about it is, how am I going to arrange these in here? And I settled upon a 4x3 arrangement on this, 4 this way, 3 front to back. And I want these dimensions to be a little bit less cumulative of these boxes when you add them up, less than about 1/4 inch less than the inside dimensions on the drawer. So that means they need to be about 17 7/8 by 17 1/4. So I worked that back and forth several times, and I finally came up with this. 4 wide at 4 5/16 each will be 17 1/4, and that's 1/4 inch less than 17 1/2. So it gives a little slack in there. Then 5 15/16 long by 3 of those front to back adds up to 17 13/16 in an 18 1/8 drawer. So there's 3/16 there and 2/16 there, so that's 5/16, a little over 1/4. So I'm good to go on that. Now the challenge becomes how to lay all this out and cut these out on a piece of plywood. Next, I've got to figure out how high the fronts and backs are going to be, and they're going to set on the bottom. And so if it's going to be 2 1/2 inches high overall, I have to subtract off the thickness of the bottom, and I just measured that. It's 7/32 of an inch. It's some kind of millimeters, you know. When you buy plywood these days, you better measure and find out, because 3/4 inch plywood isn't 3/4 of an inch anymore necessarily. Anyway, I measured that, so I got to cut these strips out of 1x material exactly 2 9/32 of an inch. I've got the saw set up for exactly a 2 9/32 inch cut, exactly. And remember in the safety video I talked about planning and visualizing your cut? Good thing I did that too, because if I hadn't, I would have knocked over the camera and the video would have gone kerplunk back like that. So that's, you know, that's what happens when you visualize and plan out your cut. All right, here we go. Okay, let's see how we did. Look at that. Look at that. It's right on the money. That is absolutely right on the mark for 9/32 of an inch. Now I'm going to cut those strips into 23 1/2 inch lengths. Now I've cut the strips that are exactly 9/32 inches wide, right? Okay, so I've laid them out on this board, which is going to be the bottom of all the boxes. So they're all going to be built together like this, sort of. And I've lined this up, and you can see that this will be the back of this drawer and the front of this drawer, but there's a big gap in here, and that's because I want these pieces to be about 1/2 inch. This is 1 1/2 inches wide. Okay, so I'm going to put these on there this way, and then after those are on there and attached and glued down, I will then come along and cut strips out of this, forming a, it'll be something like this, right? I cut these strips out, and then I'm going to wind up cutting these in two. So the layout on this becomes a little bit tricky. overall length of the drawer is to be 5 15/16. So the inside dimension, since I want a 1/2 inch front and a 1/2 inch back, the inside dimension obviously then, this is an easy one, is 4 15/16 between here and here. I've got the fronts and backs pieces laid out and marked where they go. I've got down written on each one of them so I know which side goes down, which one to glue down. And so I laid this out, of course, by this inside dimension here, which is 4 15/16. So I have an overall dimension here of 9 3/8. And I'm going to lose a 1/4 inch here because I want this to be a 1/2 inch, right? And I want a 1/2 inch and a 1/2 inch, so I'll lose a 1/2 inch out of this 1 1/2 inch and a 1/2 inch here and a 1/4 inch here. And a 1/2 and a 1/2 and a 1/4 and a 1/4 is 1 1/2. And that means that this overall dimension, when I lose that material, this dimension is going to go from 19 3/8 minus 1 1/2 to 17 7/8. And guess what? That's exactly what I wanted it to be, as you can see right here. Yay! So that worked out quite well. Now, in making this overall measurement, I laid these things out and I made a mistake. And the mistake I made was when I transferred this dimension of the box, the overall dimension of 5 15/16. When I transferred that to this diagram, I wrote down 5 5/16, which meant this dimension for the inside of the drawer was 4 5/16. So when I laid that out, I came up short. So I did this overall measurement and I figured that out and I corrected that mistake. So you've heard the saying, measure twice and saw once. Well, there's another one, and it's measure twice and glue once. This piece was previously glued on with, you saw the clamps on there. Now I've placed this one and this one and this one, and I've glued them down. There's glue on the bottom, and I held these with a C-clamp temporarily while I took the nail gun and shot a nail from the bottom up into this thing. So every one of these is pinned down at the edge with a nail or two, and that's going to hold them in place while they glue down. So now it's time to go get the Newton clamps. I'll put this on here, and I'll put it on like this, put it on there like that, and now I'll bring over the Newton clamps. And there are the Newton clamps installed. You know, Isaac Newton invented gravity, so that's probably over 100 pounds pushing down on that, so yeah, that ought to hold it. The fronts and backs of all the drawers have now been glued onto the bottom. And now it's time to turn our attention to cutting strips out of here, and for that we need to know the width of the drawer. So here's an example of a drawer. It's going to come out of here, and we're going to have sides on the drawer like this. Now the sides in this design are 1/4 inch. So we're going to have 1/4 inch pieces, one on this side, and then we'll cut this and there'll be one down in there. So we need to figure out what the dimension of these strips is going to be. And turning our attention back to the plans, we know that we want the drawer to be 4 5/16 wide. So if we're going to have 1/4 inch strips on each side, then we need to cut the drawers at 3 13/16. So I'm going to have to make 3 13/16 inch strips out of this. Now to begin the process of cutting out these strips of boxes, I've got to take off this edge here. This edge and this edge are sacrificial because these are not lined up with the edge in any manner, and also there's some nails in these ends here to keep that aligned while the glue dried. So the first thing I'm going to do is whack off this edge. I've turned this whole thing around now, and this is the piece that came off of the edge. So now I'm ready to run the first strip of drawer. Here's the first strip of boxes cut off the main piece, and now here are the sides. So I'm going to measure this and see how close it is. So let's measure this width. There we go, 4 5/16 on the nose. Oh man, how good is that guy? I've got the 4 strips of boxes ripped out now, and I wound up with this extra because the piece of plywood I was using was 24 inches square, so I've got... And so now comes a very important step, and that is to go ahead and place these in there and take a measurement. Before we go any further, I want to check the overall width of these boxes. I'll put a little pipe clamp in here, have it lightly clamped together, and I want to measure here, and guess what I'm getting? 17 1/4. Okay. And there it is, 17 1/4. Perfect. The next step will be to glue the sides on. Here's my plan on gluing on the sides. I want to place glue all along these, okay? And then after I get that spread properly, I'm going to take it and put this thing in here like this. I'm going to clamp this down. I'm going to put the rest of the glue on this. Then I'm going to take it out of this vise, and I'm going to rush it over here to this vise where I already have the sides standing up. Put it down in here, clamp the vise down, boom, and let it set. All the glue up's been done, and that method of gluing from one vise to the other, that worked out great. So now it's time to start cutting these boxes apart. So I made this little gauge because I want this to be a 1/2 inch here, 1/2 inch here, and a 1/2 inch here on each end of the box. So I'm going to do the one end now, and I got made this little gauge with a 1/2 inch right here, and I'll simply mark these like this. And then, since that mark is actually proud of a 1/2 inch, I'm going to take that mark. In other words, I'm going to cut that mark off. Blade's going to be just about right there. That way I should wind up with exactly a 1/2 inch. I'm going to make all these cuts on the table saw with my miter gauge with a helper fence on the miter gauge. The blade is going to come right here, so I have this adjusted where this mark is just perceptibly beyond this blade location, and that should give me a 1/2 inch. There's the boxes cut apart. 1/2 inch, 1/2 inch, 1/2 inch ends have been accomplished, and now it's time to make these all a 1/2 inch, but that's not the way it's going to happen. We wanted the overall length of the drawer to be 5 15/16. So that's the way I'm going to make this next cut. So I'm going to set up a stop block on the face of the miter gauge, and then I'll cut them all to the same length. That ought to wind up with a 1/2 inch on each end. And here is that stop block set at 5 15/16 of an inch from the blade. And there's the first set, completely cut out, done, and looking good, man. And there they are, all finished. And the width dimension came out absolutely perfect at 17 1/4, but the length dimension came out 1/8 inch less. It came out 17 3/4 instead of 17 7/8. So I'm an 1/8 inch off, but that's okay because it's smaller. I don't want it to be bigger, and you can see how that might happen because there are actually 6 saw curves or 6 cuts that go on as far as cutting the drawers apart this way, and so there's a little error in there. So being an 1/8 of an inch off, that's not that bad. And there they are, installed with stuff in them. And then here are the old boxes that came out, ready to go to the trash, I guess. So that's one way to make wooden boxes like these. And I am sorry for saying drawers so many times. I don't know why I did that. I guess I'm just an idiot. So there you go. See you next time.